The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory in 1883. Samuel Henderson wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he worked his small farm on the outskirts of Cedar Creek. The town was nothing more than a collection of wooden buildings and hopeful dreams, populated by settlers who had come west seeking a fresh start. Samuel had been one of those dreamers 5 years ago. After losing his wife to fever back in Missouri, he packed his few belongings and headed west with his young daughter, Mary. The land was harsh and unforgiving, but it was honest work, and that was all Samuel asked for. The corn was struggling this season. The rains had been sparse, and the soil seemed to reject every seed he planted. Samuel knew that without a good harvest, he and Mary would face a difficult winter. Still, he worked the land with determination, believing that persistence would eventually pay off. It was during one of these particularly challenging mornings that Samuel noticed something unusual near his well. A small figure crouched behind the wooden structure, barely visible in the early morning light. Samuel approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle that hung by his side. As he drew closer, he saw that the figure was a child, no more than 8 or 9 years old. The boy was Apache, with traditional clothing that was now torn and dirty. His face was gaunt with hunger, and his eyes held the desperate look of someone who had not eaten in days. The child saw Samuel approaching and tensed, ready to run. But exhaustion and hunger had weakened him, and he could barely stand. Samuel stopped a few feet away, slowly raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy there, son," Samuel said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy's eyes darted between Samuel and the path that led back to the wilderness. Samuel could see the internal struggle playing out on the child's face, fear warring with desperate need. Samuel knew the tensions between the settlers and the Apache tribes. There had been conflicts, raids, and mistrust on both sides. Many of his neighbors would not hesitate to drive off an Apache child, or worse. But looking at this hungry boy, Samuel saw only a fellow human being in need. "You hungry?" Samuel asked, making eating motions with his hands. The boy's eyes flickered with hope, but he remained motionless. Samuel slowly backed away and walked to his cabin. Inside, he gathered some bread, dried meat, and a jar of water. When he returned, the boy was still there, though he looked ready to bolt at any moment. Samuel placed the food on the ground between them and stepped back. "Go ahead," he said softly. "Take it." The boy approached the food cautiously, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. When he was sure there was no trick, he grabbed the provisions and began eating with the desperation of someone who had not had a proper meal in far too long. As the boy ate, Samuel sat down on a nearby stump, making himself less threatening. He watched as color slowly returned to the child's cheeks, and strength seemed to flow back into his small frame. "What's your name, son?" Samuel asked, when the boy had finished eating. The boy looked at him with uncertainty. Samuel realized the child might not speak English. "Samuel," he said, pointing to himself. "Samuel." The boy considered this for a moment, then pointed to himself. "Ayanna," he said quietly. Samuel nodded and smiled. "Ayanna, that's a good name." Over the next few minutes, Samuel managed to communicate through simple gestures and words that Ayanna was welcome to return if he needed food. The boy seemed to understand, nodding gravely before disappearing into the wilderness as quietly as he had appeared. That evening, Samuel told his daughter Mary about the encounter. She was 12 years old, wise beyond her years from the hardships they had faced together. "Will he come back, Pa?" Mary asked. "I don't know, sweetheart. But if he does, we'll help him." "Even though he's Apache?" Samuel looked at his daughter seriously. "Mary, hunger doesn't care about the color of a person's skin or which tribe they belong to. That boy was starving. And when someone's starving, you help them. That's what your mother would have done." Mary nodded, understanding the lesson her father was teaching her. True to Samuel's prediction, Ayanna returned the next morning. This time, he approached more openly, though still with caution. Samuel provided him with another meal, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the boy ate. This pattern continued for several days. Ayanna would appear at dawn. Samuel would feed him, and then the boy would disappear back into the wilderness. Samuel began to look forward to these visits. There was something about the child's quiet dignity and grateful nature that reminded him of the basic goodness that existed in people, regardless of their background. On the 5th day, Ayanna did not come alone. Samuel was working in his garden when he heard voices approaching. Looking up, he saw Ayanna walking toward him, accompanied by 2 adult Apache men. Samuel's heart began to race, but he forced himself to remain calm. The 2 men were clearly warriors, their faces painted and their weapons visible, but Ayanna walked between them without fear, speaking to them in rapid Apache as they approached Samuel's property. Samuel stood up slowly, his hands visible and empty. One of the Apache warriors spoke to Ayanna, who then looked at Samuel and pointed to the spot where they had shared their meals. The warrior who had spoken stepped forward. To Samuel's surprise, he spoke in clear, though accented, English. "My nephew tells me you have fed him," the warrior said, his expression unreadable. Samuel nodded. "Yes, sir. The boy was hungry. You did not ask for payment. You did not ask questions." "No, sir. A hungry child is a hungry child." The warrior studied Samuel for a long moment. His companion whispered something in Apache, but the first warrior held up his hand for silence. "I am Nalnish," the warrior said finally. "This boy is my brother's son. His parents were killed in a raid by soldiers 3 weeks ago. He has been wandering, trying to survive." Samuel felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." Nalnish nodded grimly. "You could have turned him away. You could have shot him. Many would have. I couldn't do that to a child." "This kindness will be remembered," Nalnish said solemnly. He spoke briefly to Ayanna in Apache. Then both warriors turned and began walking away. "Wait," Samuel called out. "The boy, Ayanna? He's welcome here anytime he needs food." Nalnish paused and looked back. "That will not be necessary. He comes with us now to our people. But your kindness will be remembered," he repeated, and there was something in his tone that suggested those words carried more weight than Samuel realized. As the 3 figures disappeared into the wilderness, Samuel felt a mixture of sadness and hope. He had grown fond of the quiet boy, but he understood that Ayanna belonged with his people. Still, Samuel was glad he had been able to help, even in a small way. That evening, as Samuel and Mary sat down to their simple dinner, Mary asked, "Do you think we'll ever see Ayanna again, Pa?" Samuel looked out the window toward the vast wilderness that surrounded their small farm. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I hope wherever he is, he's safe and well-fed." Neither of them could have imagined that this simple act of kindness toward a hungry child would soon become the thing that saved their lives and the lives of everyone in Cedar Creek. The wheels of fate had been set in motion, though it would be weeks before they understood the true significance of what had transpired. For now, Samuel simply felt good about having done the right thing, never suspecting that his compassion had been witnessed and noted by people who understood the true value of mercy in a harsh and unforgiving land. 3 months had passed since Samuel Henderson last saw Ayanna and his Apache relatives. Life in Cedar Creek had continued its predictable rhythm of hard work and small victories. The corn harvest had been better than expected, giving Samuel and Mary enough to see them through the winter with some to spare. The town itself had grown slightly, with 2 new families arriving from back east and a general store finally opening its doors. There was talk of eventually getting a railroad spur, though most folks knew that was probably just wishful thinking. Samuel had mentioned his encounter with Ayanna to a few trusted friends, but word had spread despite his discretion. The reaction in town was mixed. Some folks admired Samuel's compassion, while others questioned the wisdom of showing kindness to hostiles, as they called any Apache in the area. The territorial government had been struggling with Apache raids for months. Several ranches to the north had been attacked, and there were constant rumors of war parties moving through the region. The military presence had increased, with patrols riding through Cedar Creek weekly, asking questions and warning residents to be vigilant. It was during one particularly tense October morning that everything changed. Samuel was repairing his barn roof when he noticed dust clouds on the horizon. At first, he thought it might be another military patrol, but as the figures drew closer, He realized these were Apache warriors. And there were many of them. Samuel climbed down from the roof quickly and called for Mary to come inside the cabin. Through the window, he counted at least 20 mounted warriors approaching the town. His heart raced as he reached for his rifle. Though he knew it would be useless against so many, the Apache party rode directly toward his farm, and Samuel recognized the lead rider as Nalnish, the warrior who had spoken to him months ago. But this time, there was no small boy with them, and the expressions on the warriors' faces were grim and determined. Samuel stepped out onto his porch, his rifle visible but not raised. He wanted to show he was prepared to defend himself, but not looking for a fight. Nalnish raised his hand, and the war party stopped just outside Samuel's property. The Apache leader rode forward alone, his horse snorting and stamping in the morning air. "Samuel Henderson," Nalnish said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "That's me," Samuel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have come to repay a debt." Samuel was confused. "I don't understand. You don't owe me anything." Nalnish's expression remained serious. "You fed my nephew when he was hungry. You showed kindness when others would have shown only hatred. This creates an obligation." "There's no obligation. I did what any decent person would do. Perhaps. But not any person would have done it." Nalnish gestured toward the town of Cedar Creek, visible in the distance. "My warriors and I have been watching this area for many days. We have been planning." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. "Planning what?" "This town sits on land that was once ours. Settlers have taken it. Soldiers have spilled our blood defending it. My war council decided it was time to reclaim what was stolen." The implications of Nalnish's words began to sink in. Samuel thought of Mary inside the cabin, of his neighbors in town going about their daily business, unaware of the danger surrounding them. "We plan to attack at dawn tomorrow," Nalnish continued. "Every building would burn. Every settler would die or flee." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. "And now? Now I find myself in debt to one of those settlers, the man who fed my nephew when the boy had nothing." Nalnish paused, seeming to wrestle with his thoughts. Behind him, the other warriors sat motionless on their horses, but Samuel could sense their tension and impatience. "I spoke to my war council last night," Nalnish said finally. "I told them about your kindness to Ayanna. Some said it changed nothing. That one good act cannot balance the scales of all the wrongs done to our people." "And what do you think?" Samuel asked. "I think that mercy should be answered with mercy. But I am only one voice among many." Nalnish looked back at his warriors, then returned his gaze to Samuel. "So I will make you an offer. You have until sunrise tomorrow to leave this place. Take your daughter, take whatever you can carry, and go. Do not return." Samuel felt a mix of relief and anguish. "What about the others? What about the town?" "That is not your concern. I can only offer this mercy to you, because of what you did for my nephew. Let me warn them. Let me tell the others to leave too." Nalnish shook his head firmly. "No. If you warn them, they will prepare for war. They will send for soldiers. Then many of my people will die, and the debt I owe you will be paid in blood instead of mercy." His voice hardened. "Take what I offer, Samuel Henderson. It is more than most would give." Samuel looked toward the town, thinking of the families there, the children who played in the dusty streets, the shopkeepers and farmers who had become his friends and neighbors. How could he save himself and Mary while leaving them to face destruction? "I can't do it," Samuel said quietly. "I can't leave them to die." Nalnish's expression darkened. "Then you choose to die with them, if that's what it takes." The Apache warrior stared at Samuel for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. He spoke rapidly in Apache to his men, and Samuel heard several angry responses. An argument seemed to break out among the warriors, with voices rising and gestures becoming more animated. Finally, Nalnish raised his hand for silence. He spoke to his men in a tone that brooked no argument. Though Samuel could tell some of them were far from satisfied with whatever decision had been made. Nalnish turned back to Samuel. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Samuel admitted. My nephew spoke often of you during his time with our people. He said you sat with him while he ate, that you treated him like your own child. He said you had kind eyes, like his father had. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. Ayana asked me to give you something if I ever saw you again, Nalnish continued. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small, carved figure of a horse, clearly made by a child's hands. He made this for you. He said you were the first person to be kind to him after his parents died. Samuel stepped forward and accepted the small gift. The carving was rough but made with obvious care and affection. There will be no attack on your town, Nalnish said suddenly. Samuel looked up in surprise. What? My war council has agreed to spare Cedar Creek. Your refusal to abandon your neighbors has convinced them that perhaps not all white settlers are the same. Nalnish's voice carried a note of resignation. We will find another target, one where the people are not protected by a debt of honor. Protected by a debt of honor? When you fed my nephew, you created a bond between our people and yours. When you refused to save only yourself, you proved that bond was real. Nalnish gathered his horse's reins. But understand this, Samuel Henderson. This protection extends only to this town, and only as long as the people here remember what kindness means. Samuel watched as Nalnish prepared to leave. Will I see Ayana again? Perhaps. He often speaks of returning to visit the kind farmer who fed him when he was lost and hungry. Nalnish almost smiled. He wishes to learn farming from you. He says the old ways are changing, and his people must learn new ways to survive. With that, Nalnish turned his horse and rejoined his warriors. The entire war party wheeled around and rode back toward the horizon, leaving Samuel standing alone in his yard, clutching the small wooden horse. That evening, Samuel sat with Mary by their fireplace and told her everything that had happened. He showed her Ayana's gift and explained how a simple act of kindness had grown into something that saved their entire community. So the town is safe? Mary asked. For now, Samuel said. But Nalnish was right about one thing. We need to remember what kindness means. We need to remember that our actions have consequences we might never see coming. As winter approached, life in Cedar Creek continued much as it always had, though Samuel noticed subtle changes. People seemed a little more thoughtful, a little more aware of how they treated strangers and those in need. Word of what had happened spread slowly through the community, and while some dismissed it as tall tales, others took it to heart. Samuel never told anyone about the planned attack or how close they had all come to disaster. He felt that knowledge would only breed fear and hatred, the very things that had nearly destroyed them all. Instead, he simply continued to live by the principles that had guided his actions from the beginning. Treat others with kindness, help those in need, and remember that we are all human beings struggling to make our way in a difficult world. The wooden horse sat on Samuel's mantelpiece, a reminder of a hungry child and the unexpected consequences of simple human decency. Every time he looked at it, Samuel thought about Ayana and wondered what kind of man the boy would become. He hoped that someday, when the boy was grown, he might remember that kindness could bridge any gap between people, no matter how wide it seemed. 2 years had passed since the Apache war party had spared Cedar Creek, and the town had flourished in ways no one could have predicted. The railroad spur that had once been just a dream was now under construction, and new businesses were opening every month. The population had nearly doubled, with families arriving from all over the country to start fresh in this peaceful corner of New Mexico territory. Samuel Henderson had become something of a local legend, though he never spoke openly about the events that had saved the town. When pressed by newcomers about the stories they heard, Samuel would simply say that treating people with kindness was always the right choice, regardless of who they were or where they came from. His farm had prospered as well. The railroad company had purchased several acres of his land for a station depot, providing him with enough money to expand his remaining property and invest in better equipment. Mary, now 14, had grown into a thoughtful young woman who helped her father with both the farming and the increasing number of visitors who came to hear the story of the Apache boy and the kind farmer. It was on a warm spring morning in 1885 that Samuel noticed a lone rider approaching his property. There was something familiar about the way the figure sat on his horse, and as he drew closer, Samuel's heart began to race with recognition. The rider was young, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, with the bearing and dress of an Apache warrior. But his face was unmistakably that of the hungry child Samuel had fed 2 years ago. Ayanna had grown tall and strong, his shoulders broad, and his eyes still holding that same quiet intelligence Samuel remembered. Samuel walked out to meet him, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "Ayanna," he called out. "You've grown." The young man dismounted and approached Samuel with a confident stride, though Samuel could see traces of the shy boy he had once been. "Samuel Henderson," Ayanna said, his English much improved. "I have come to see you, as I promised my uncle I would." They embraced briefly, and Samuel felt a warmth in his chest that reminded him of greeting an old friend. Or perhaps a son he hadn't seen in far too long. "Mary," Samuel called toward the cabin. Mary emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw Ayanna, her face lit up with recognition and joy. She had heard so many stories about the Apache boy that she felt she knew him personally. "Ayanna," she said warmly, "Father has told me so much about you." "I'm Mary." Ayanna nodded respectfully. "You have grown beautiful, Mary Henderson. Your father spoke of you often when I was hungry and small." The three of them sat together on Samuel's porch, sharing water and the bread that Mary had baked that morning. Ayanna told them about his life with his people, how he had learned the ways of a warrior but also studied English with a missionary who lived near their winter camp. "I have been thinking much about what my uncle Nalnish told me," Ayanna said as the conversation turned more serious. "He said you chose to stay and protect your people rather than save only yourself. This is the mark of a true leader." Samuel waved away the compliment. "I just did what felt right. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Ayanna said firmly. "Not anyone. Many would have taken the offer to save themselves. Many would never have fed a hungry Apache child in the first place." He paused, looking out over Samuel's thriving farm. "My people are changing, Samuel Henderson. The old ways are becoming harder to follow. The buffalo are gone. The soldiers grow stronger. And more settlers come every day." "What will you do?" Mary asked gently. "Some of my people want to fight until the end. Others think we should try to make peace and learn new ways to live." Ayanna's expression grew thoughtful. "I think there is wisdom in both paths, but I believe the future lies in learning to build bridges between our peoples." Samuel leaned forward with interest. "What do you mean?" "I want to learn farming," Ayanna said simply. "My uncle told me you might be willing to teach me. Not so I can become a white man, but so I can help my people survive in a world that is changing, whether we want it to or not." Samuel felt a surge of pride and responsibility. Teaching Ayanna to farm would not just be about crops and livestock. It would be about building the kind of understanding between communities that could prevent future conflicts. "I would be honored to teach you," Samuel said. "But your people might not understand. They might think you're betraying your heritage." "Some will think that," Ayanna agreed. "But my uncle supports this idea. He says that warriors must sometimes fight with seeds and plows instead of arrows and horses. He says the bravest warriors are those who ensure their people's survival, no matter what form that survival takes." Over the following months, Ayanna became a regular presence on Samuel's farm. He arrived each morning at dawn and worked alongside Samuel and Mary, learning everything from soil preparation to crop rotation, from animal husbandry to basic carpentry. His strength and intelligence made him an excellent student, and his questions often pushed Samuel to think more deeply about farming techniques he had simply taken for granted. The arrangement was not without its challenges. When word spread through Cedar Creek that Samuel was teaching farming to an Apache, some residents were uncomfortable with the idea. A few families even spoke of asking the territorial authorities to intervene, claiming that Samuel was harboring a potential threat to the community. Samuel addressed these concerns directly, speaking at a town meeting about the importance of building bridges with their Apache neighbors, rather than maintaining walls of suspicion and fear. This young man could have been raised to hate all white settlers, Samuel told the gathered crowd. Instead, he's chosen to learn from us. to find ways for our peoples to coexist peacefully. If we reject that gesture, if we turn away someone who wants to build understanding between us, then we're no better than those who would choose war over peace. Mary spoke up from the back of the room, her voice clear and strong despite her youth. Ayanna saved this town just as much as his uncle did. By choosing to trust us, by coming here to learn rather than to fight, he's showing us that peace is possible. If we can't see that, then maybe we don't deserve the peace we've been given. The townspeople listened in thoughtful silence. Many of them had prospered during the past 2 years of relative peace with the Apache tribes, and they understood that this prosperity was directly connected to the relationship Samuel had built with Nalnish and his people. Dr. Williams, the town's physician, and one of its most respected citizens, stood up. "I've seen this young man working on Samuel's farm. He's respectful, hard-working, and clearly intelligent. If he's willing to learn our ways, then perhaps we should be willing to learn from his as well." Gradually, acceptance began to replace suspicion. Some families invited Ayanna to share meals with them, curious to hear about Apache customs and traditions. Children who had initially been frightened of him began to wave when they saw him working in the fields. Shopkeepers started greeting him by name when he came to town for supplies. Ayanna, for his part, proved to be an excellent ambassador for his people. He answered questions about Apache culture with patience and honesty, while also showing genuine interest in settler traditions and customs. He attended a church service when invited, participated in the town's harvest festival, and even helped organize a rescue effort when a child went missing in the nearby hills. As autumn approached, Ayanna announced that he would soon need to return to his people for the winter. He had learned enough about farming to begin teaching others in his tribe, and he wanted to convince them to establish permanent agricultural settlements rather than continuing to move from place to place. "This is just the beginning," he told Samuel as they watched the sunset from the farmhouse porch. "I believe that someday, Apache and settler children will grow up together, learning from each other instead of fearing each other." "That's a beautiful dream," Mary said. "I hope it comes true." "It will take time," Ayanna admitted. "There are those on both sides who profit from hatred and conflict. But I have seen that kindness is stronger than fear, and understanding is more powerful than ignorance." On his last evening in Cedar Creek, the townspeople organized a farewell gathering for Ayanna. It was held in the main street, with lanterns strung between buildings and tables laden with food prepared by every family in town. Apache and settler traditions mingled as Ayanna shared stories of his people while learning American folk songs from the local children. As the evening wound down, Mayor Peterson stood to address the crowd. "When young Ayanna first came to our town, many of us were afraid. We saw only an Apache, someone we had been taught to mistrust. But over these months, we've learned to see a friend, a teacher, and a bridge between our peoples." He turned to Ayanna. "You've shown us that peace isn't just possible, it's profitable for everyone involved. Our town has grown and prospered because we've had good relations with your people. Our children sleep safely at night because we've chosen understanding over hatred." Ayanna stood and bowed respectfully to the gathered crowd. "You have given me something more valuable than all the farming knowledge I have learned," he said. "You have given me hope that my children and your children might someday live as neighbors instead of enemies." As Ayanna prepared to leave the next morning, Samuel gave him several bags of seed corn, along with detailed written instructions for cultivation that Ayanna could share with his people. Mary presented him with a carefully sewn leather satchel for carrying the seeds safely. "Remember," Samuel said, as they said their final goodbyes, "farming isn't just about growing crops. It's about growing communities, growing trust, and growing the kind of relationships that make everyone stronger." Ayanna mounted his horse and looked back at the town of Cedar Creek one last time. "I will remember everything you have taught me," he promised. "And I will teach my children that kindness to a stranger is never wasted, because you never know when that stranger might become the bridge between two worlds." As Ayanna rode away toward the horizon, Samuel reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with a simple decision to feed a hungry child. That one act of kindness had grown into something that transformed an entire community, creating understanding where there had been suspicion, and hope where there had been fear. The wooden horse that Ayanna had carved years ago still sat on Samuel's mantelpiece. But now it was joined by other gifts. A beaded bracelet that Apache women had made for Mary, a carved pipe that Nalnish had sent as a token of continued friendship, and a collection of letters that Ayanna would send over the years, updating Samuel on the progress of the Apache agricultural settlements. Years later, when historians wrote about the peaceful coexistence between the settlers of Cedar Creek and the local Apache tribes, they would point to economic factors, military strategies, and political negotiations. But Samuel Henderson knew the truth was simpler and more powerful than all of that. It had started with recognizing the humanity in a hungry child, and it had grown from there into something that changed the world. One act of kindness at a time. The story of the farmer who fed one hungry Apache child became a legend that spread throughout the territory and beyond. It was told around campfires and in schoolhouses, in saloons and in churches, always with the same moral: that small acts of kindness can have consequences far greater than we ever imagine, and that the bridges we build between peoples are always stronger than the walls we put up to divide them.